Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be starting up the weekly meta breakdowns again for each of the formats. We're slowly getting in data from the new set Karlov Manor on Untapped, which is like the companion tool that aggregates arena user data. So if you yourself use Untapped, it tracks your win rates, aggregates it with others, we get some cool stats. If you want to use Untapped, the link's in the video description. But we're going to look today at a couple different things because it's still fairly early. We don't have an extensive amount. My focus on this video is going to be on new deck ideas. A lot of the established decks, Domain, the Dimir kind of mid-rangey, tempo-less, those are still doing well in the format, Ban Toxic, stuff like that. Esper Midrange. I'm not going to show you a deck list that's been around right now. I think the focus of this video is really to kind of see what is new, what are people trying out. So in addition to Untapped today, we are going to be leveraging some MTGO, Magic the Gathering Online 5.0 lists, as well as some lists that I've just come across through Twitter, the community, stuff like that to get started. Population on some of these decks is going to be fairly small, at least on the Untapped side, but it's been less than a week. Notably, this is for standard best of 3. Sorry, should have mentioned that off the bat. Standard best of 1, I don't have like a huge amount of data, surprisingly. That's differentiating between just literally stock mono red, mono white, and enchantments. So I'm hoping in the next coming days we get a little bit more information, and then I can start providing some new deck ideas, because not much right now that I can offer you other than stock mono red, and then like one Boros Convoke deck. But we're going to look as best of 3, platinum to mythic rank, the most popular decks, and don't worry about the deck list. I'll link them all in the video description, timestamp them, you're good to go. We will get started. So Boros Convoke, 17%, probably the most popular deck from the new set. This is pretty much akin or very close to the Pioneer version. So you get a very powered up, juiced up deck. The only downside that I've really been seeing with this deck, the Boros mana base is terrible in standard. There's no fast land. You're playing like a bunch of you're playing Thran Portal in some cases, or relying on Myrex to give you an untapped land with the right colors. But it's tough out there for Boros players with the mana base at least. Mono red aggro 7.5, Esper midrange 7.5, just in terms of popularity of decks. We have Golgari midrange at 7, Domain, and then we kind of come down to some of the lesser popular decks. The one deck like Boros Convoke just kind of shot up in popularity, a deck that wasn't there. This kind of trending because it's the first week, we're going to leave it as that and kind of go from there. Usually we'll kind of do the trends and stuff like that. So we're going to look platinum to mythic rank, February 6th to the 10th, only 4 days of data. We have 21,000 best of 3 matches played. We are just putting a filter on of 35 minimum game caps, just so we could get some deck lists. If we go to the 100 games, it's one deck. It's just Boros Convoke. 50 games, it's really not that much diversity, all things considered. So it's just kind of playing around with the filters to get us some ideas to see what people are trying out, what's been working, what's not, kind of idea from there. So we'll jump into it, but before we do, just want to put out a quick note. We are trying to hit 15,000 subs on YouTube. We're just shy of 12,000. So if you haven't subbed to the channel, if you like to get your stats, like to get ideas in terms of what are the best decks each week for all arena formats, we try to cover as many as possible every week and kind of highlight trends, tournament results, stuff like that. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. It's free, easy, helps with the channel. And if you can, drop a like and comment on the video, helps with the algorithm and helps the channel and costs you nothing. So we'll jump into it. Orzhov Clerics, surprisingly, at a 72% win rate. So only 43 games, but reasonable. Someone's doing really well with the deck, at least. So if we take a look at the deck, the card that it got is this new case. So Case of the Uneaten Feast. So this is the first time you're seeing a case. Think of it almost like a saga. So the first mode comes in and it stays there static. So whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. So a Johnny's Welcome, Soul Sister style effect. To meet the condition of the second, it gives you kind of your quest. So to solve, you've gained 5 or more life this turn. If you do it at your end step, you solve the case and you get access to the last mode. So you could sacrifice the case, creature cards in your graveyard, gain, you can cast this card from your graveyard on the turn. So it's just kind of a rat mass reanimator. But you're pairing that up with Lunarch Veteran, so you have 8 on enter battlefields, gain life. Ruin Lurker Bat, just a flying life linker. If you descended, you get Scry, Scrawl for protection. Amalia lets you get some value, so this actually plays out pretty nice together. You can descend through the Explore, and then the Ruin Lurker Bat also gets you the Scry ability. Deep Cavern Bat, played in a lot of decks, eats the hand. Life of Toshiro can be very good against the Convoke deck, just -1/1, -1/1 against their tokens, or give you a buff to your flyer, make your Deep Cavern Bat 3/3 and lifelink, or you can gain some life. Gumdrop Poisoner can be removal in the deck, and just another way to gain life through the food. Single copy of Resplendent Angel. Gaining 5 is a little difficult at times. You can stack obviously the lifelink, stuff like that, but it's not like it's in the Green-White Angels deck where just playing cards out, you gain like massive chunks. You're probably gaining incidental life more often. You have Shieldred, so even like there's the way like Shieldred gain 2 from draw step, eat the food, that's 5 life, so that's one way there. Alcazats gains you 4, and then you have Knight Errant of Eos. You have a bunch of cheap creatures, you can get some card advantage that way there. There's no fast line in Orzhov, so you're leveraging these Thran portals and Myrex kind of mixed into there. In your sideboard, you got cut downs, you got Duresses for hand hate, boarded window. Creatures attacking you get -1/0 at the beginning of your end step. If you're dealt 4 or more damage this turn, you exile the boarded windows. Very good against the Convoke deck or against Toxic. You can kind of hold them back, at least absorb some damage that way there. Against Toxic, most of their things are like 1/1s, so it kind of gets them that way there. Trespasser, Graveyard Hate, Lifelink, Knockout Blows, Removal. You have Liliana for the Grandier matchups, domains, stuff like that. Lauren, Artifact, Enchantment Hate. We have a new Tomic, so 3 mana, 2/4 affinity for Planeswalkers, so not really getting cast with Planeswalkers, but think of it as a 3 mana, 2/4 Flying Vigilance more often than not. Whenever opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of the creatures attacking you are a Planeswalker, they lose 3 life and you draw a card, so nice against the kind of creature mirrors, go wide, stuff like that. Also, just incidentally, there's a lot of like Flyers decks, so having a 2/4 is pretty solid there. And then we have the new Aurelia's Vindicator, 4 mana, 4/2, flying lifelink ward 2. Has Disguise, so you can cast it for 3 mana face down as a 2/2 with ward 2. And then you can flip it for 4 mana and X, and then X is it's turn faced up, exile X target creatures from battlefield or in the graveyard. And it is either players. When it leaves the battlefield, you get to return the exile cards to its owner's hand. So it can be used as removal as well. And then a Wandering Emperor. So the Boros Convoke deck, 68%. Now there's a few different versions, but they're all kind of built around the same premise. The kind of core and what we got is Novice Inspector is a Thraben Inspector port. Basically, you have 8 1-mana cards between Novice Inspector and Voldaren Aperture that create an artifact. That artifact can be used for Gleeful Demolition to make you 3 creatures. What you can do is, if you turn 1 this, turn 2 this, or like turn 1 any of these, turn 2 the Gleeful Demolition, you can actually convoke out the Knight Errant on turn 2. So you get some card advantage and potentially draw up to 2 creatures. Yodian is another artifact that can be targeted. Warden of the Inner Sky can tap all these incidental clue tokens, blood tokens, tokens, and you get some value there. This also helps you clean the top of your deck. The card that I've been actually most impressed with is Case of the Gateway Express. And the first time I played the deck, I wasn't including it in like my day 1 brew. And then since playing it, this card does so much. So it's a removal spell that can stack a whole bunch of damage. It's very easy to solve the case. So basically, the damage is dealt based on the number of creatures you control, which is kind of common in these go wide decks. To solve the case, you have to attack with 3 or more creatures. Well, Gleeful Demolition on its own creates that. And then you get a static Anthem effect of 1/0. And then you also have War Leader's Call, another way to give your creatures a buff. And then any creature under their battlefield pings your opponent for damage. But kind of the big core is make a wide board, cast Imidane's Recruiter, pump up the whole team, and just smack face. When I said the mana base is ambitious, it's ambitious. So Cavern of Souls. Some of the decks will play the fast or the slow lands, some won't, some play a Thran Portal. I was playing just 2 more basics over 2 Sundown Pass. I'm just drawing this is like one of your first lines. It was screwing me up too often, but that's the only qualm I have. The mana base is very bad. And the festivities for go wide decks from your opponent: Lithomantic Barrage, blue-white things, Get Lost is removal, Lantern Flare is removal, Thalia for the attacks of like the bigger mana decks, control decks, and then Wedding Announcement for the heavier removal sweeper style strategies. Then we have Esper Control, 62%, and a lot of the same elements of like the control that we had in the past. Path to Peril's getting better with all these kind of go wide, low to the ground decks. Deluge, Emperor, Sunfall. We have Deduce, 2 mana, which is kind of draw 2. You draw a card for 2 mana, and then you get to investigate, and then potentially draw. You save the draw for later, but the artifacts work pretty nice because then you can use Disruption Portal to tap the artifact to get a kind of port on counterspell, 2 mana counter anything. We have Get Lost as removal, Long Goodbye, new removal. So uncounterable, destroy creature, planeswalker, 3 CMC or less. This is really good against things like Raffine, Graveyard Trespasser, anything with ward. You don't have to worry about the ward anymore. No More Lies is another powerful card that got printed, basically mana leak. So counter unless they pay 3, and then if it was countered, it gets exiled instead of the graveyard. So a lot of things coming back from the graveyard in this format, so exiling it is pretty strong. You also have Intrude on the Mind. So this is kind of a factor fiction. Reveal top 5 cards, separate them into 2 piles. Opponent chooses one of those piles, put it in your hand, and then you get to create a token, Thopter Flying, and then put 1/1 counter on it for each card put into your graveyard. So most of the time you're going to do like a 3-2 split depending on what it is. So you're often either going to be given 3 cards and a 2/2 or 2 cards and a 3/3 at flash speed, which is pretty solid. Myrax, Anchorage in the mana base as some utility lands to kind of ping at your opponent. Sideboard's got like a bunch of removal, a bunch of counters, Seed Sharks once they take out the removal. And then we also have Ezrim, Agency Chief. So 5 mana, 5/5 flying, enters battlefield, investigate twice. You can sack an artifact, and then you get your choice of Vigilance, Lifelink, Hexproof until end of turn. Against things like mono red, they'll probably take out the Witchstalker Frenzy, for example. So this comes in, it's a nice life gainer. Then one that's kind of cool, but I'm not sure how, like, I see this deck and I'm just curious how it's actually putting up this high results, 61%. Mardu Humans, with a curve that's the curviest of curves. So we have 2 Luminarch Veterans, then we have Charming Scoundrels, Kalperko Vanguards, Resolute Reinforcements, Adeline, as well as a King Pakal. So just really going wide with humans. We have Delenny, Streetwise Lookout, the new mythic, 3 mana, 2/2. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or more. A lot of these small creatures can pump through damage. If an ability a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So any sort of like the double life gain, depending on where the power of an Pakal is, or Adeline, you get those extra bonuses. And then you also have Roaming Throne, which doubles up. You're going to name human with this, doubles up the triggers. You have Mishra that can double up the triggers in terms of gain and drain. And then you have Knight Errant that can draw you cards as well. With this one here, you have Cavernous Souls, a Secluded Courtyard. So by going dedicated humans, you get access to Courtyard, which is another untapped land, and a couple copies of Plaza Heroes, since you have a lot of legendaries in there. Hopeful Initiates for artifact enchantment hate, I guess, but seems a little slow. Against like more aggressive decks, you have the Lunar Veterans, Jarina for non-exile sweepers, Thalia for tax, a heavy removal, you have Extraction Specialist, you have Imidane's Recruiter, I guess, to push out damage, and then Night Clubbers as a way to deal with like any go wide token decks out of your opponent deck, toxic stuff like that. Sideboard's a little like just going all creatures. I think you can probably afford some removal in it. I would look even very similar to the Boros Convoke deck just in terms of sideboard. I think that's just like a reasonable port. You may even want something like, I guess actually since you're not playing true black mana, you can't play Duress, but I would look at like the Boros Convoke sideboard and play something similar to that. Then we go to, so Yeoman5 on Twitter got 5-0 on MTGO with mono green Stompy. So this was the original list that they went with. I just put out a video of the deck. Pretty sweet deck. The one thing I would say is it really wants access to like a 2 mana or another 1 mana threat. The curve's pretty high. So you have these kind of evolve creatures and evolving adaptive. You also have Sharp-Eyed Rookie, which this card is actually really sweet in the games. So it's a 2 mana 2/2 with vigilance. And then whenever a creature power toughness greater than its power toughness enters, it gets a counter on it, and you also get to investigate. So it's providing some form of card advantage in a deck that normally doesn't have card advantage. Then you also have like the most green creature ever. It's a 2 mana 0/0 that gets +1/1 for each forest you control. You can technically disguise it and flip it up to find lands, but most of the time it's just a 2 mana 2/2, then it becomes 3/3, 4/4, whatever. Just big old honest magic. Bloated Contaminator was pretty sweet in the deck. You have a lot of ways to put counters on things, so this lets you proliferate onto them. Lucranos, honestly, kind of sucked in the deck. I'd probably just play more Sentinels of the Nameless City. Again, just to get ways to get map tokens or stuff like that to try to provide pseudo card advantage in a deck that doesn't really have access to card advantage. Uvenwald Oddity as another creature to just smash through damage. Rootwire Amalgam. In my version, for the video I played, the only change I ended up making was I cut the Rootwire just for another Nissa. The deck's already very soft to sweepers, in particular exile-based sweepers. So I didn't want to play another card that just got hit by it. You're also, like, Nissa's just grind your advantage against some of those decks. Archdruid's Charm was another cool one. So pretty much 2 modes you're going to use for it in Standard, I would say. You're not really concerned with the land. However, one game I did want to search up the Blast Zone in the sideboard for like Convoke, which was kind of cool. But you can put counters on it, on a creature, and then it deals damage to a creature you don't control. So notably, fight versus deal damage. Deal damage has a lot more advantage because you can hit a Shieldred, you can hit an Atraxa without your creature dying in exchange. This also has the ability to exile an artifact or enchantment, so you can get rid of like War Leader's Call, you can get rid of Leyline Binding, Wedding Announcement, whatever's relevant in that respect. Bushwhack can be used for fight or to find a forest, and then invoke the Ancients. This card is still legal in Standard. This was being played with like Blizzard Brawl, it feels like 3 years ago. An Argoth, a Beseju, and then a bunch of forests for the Flourishing Bloomkin. Blast Zone in the sideboard for kind of creature go wide decks. Pick your poison for artifact enchantment hate, or it can also be hit Atraxa. It's very useful, I think, against the domain matchup. Tavar Stand is really good against like the blue-black decks. Not as good against like Sunfall decks. Filigree Silex is another cool one. For Convoke, you can deal with all the tokens. You can deal with like Toxic and kind of go wide. Tranquil Throwback as a artifact enchantment hate kind of card, life gain, graveyard hate, and then Axebane Ferox here. This was one where kind of when Uvenwald Oddity sucks against Shieldred or like Golgari decks or just things that kind of just slightly outpace it on scale. Axebane Ferox provides a similar idea of a hasty 4-drop with Collect Evidence. This one here makes it a little bit harder for your opponent to kill, and then the Death Touch, at least it trades with Shieldred as opposed to the Uvenwald that just gets eaten up. We then have, but yeah, if you want to see the mono green, I just put out a video the other day. So a couple 5-0s from MTGO. We have Sultai Roots from Young Toast. They went 5-0. So this is built around Insidious Roots. So this is a card that's been one of the more popular kind of build-around cards, I would say, from the set. So creature tokens you control you add a mana. Whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, you get to create a 0/1 plant and then put a 1/1 counter on each plant you control. So what you're trying to do with this is leverage cards like Aftermath Analyst, 2 mana, 1/3, enters the battlefield, you mill, then you can sacrifice it for 4 mana and return all those lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tab. So it could be pretty big. Like I played a game actually against Ali Eldrazi, and he was on this kind of tab. He ramped like 6 lands off this. Rubble Belt, Maverick, 1 mana, 1/1, Surveils 2, put cards into your graveyard, and then it's a fairly cheap enabler for the Roots by just exiling, you get to put a counter. Scornblade Berserker basically is just serving as kind of a card draw thing, puts creatures into your graveyard. Foulspawn Spider, 2 mana, 2/3 reach. Reach kind of a sneaky keyword. Beginning your upkeep, you get to mill 1, and then you can sacrifice the spider and you get to create a 1/1 insect token for each creature in your graveyard. Colossal Sky Turtle, just kind of utility. Philagi, another way to kind of mill your deck. Soul Cauldron gets you some value, and then it's instances of cards leaving the graveyard. Urborg Repossession, another way to get things out of your graveyard. Tyvar, Reanimate, get things out of your graveyard kind of theme. So you're basically just going to create a bunch of tokens, get things out of your graveyard, put counters on them, and go to work from there. And then your sideboard, you have cut downs as removal. Souls of the Lost is actually what kicked my ass in the mono green match. Just bringing these in, they just get bigger than your opponent. So in a lot of they just smash them creature mirrors. This is a fairly large creature. Pick your poisons, the rest of it is long goodbyes. We then go to Azorius Midrange by Islands Go Same 5-0. So this is kind of a mid-rangey version. We have Aurelia's Vindicator, which we covered a 3 of. Denix, the Doorkeeper Thrall's been kind of sick. I was playing a slightly different version of this, but just a flash artifacts and creatures enter the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So your Atraxa doesn't trigger anything that's on ETB. The life gain deck was shutting off the life gain, which is kind of cool. Fairy Masterminds in here, Malcolm's. Get Lost, No More Lies, Virtue of Loyalty. So the nice thing with this deck is you can play control-y elements, you can play aggressive depending on how your opponent plays. Wedding Announcements, Wandering Emperor kind of mixed into there as well. Restless Anchorage in the sideboard and the mana base. Sideboard is basically just kind of strokes, more removal, Cathar Commando, Artifact Enchantment Hate. So you're basically just bringing in kind of incidental removal, interaction, and then you also have access to the temporary lockdown, which is very good against all these low to the ground, go wide decks. We then go to Dimir Control. This is from Makubi, and this one got 5-0 as well. So the big thing with Dimir is we got a new sweeper in Deadly Cover-Up, 5 mana unconditional sweeper. They can also collect evidence of 6, and then Surgical Extraction out, so exile all the cards of that name from your opponent's library. So you can get rid of all their Atraxas or whatever it may be. Another card that you're going to see is Cryptic Coat. So kind of innocuous, but it's a 3 mana. It comes in and you get to cloak something. So it comes in, it gets equipped automatically to it. So Cloak is a 2 mana, 2/2 ward 2. Cloak is a 2/2 ward 2, and then this gets equipped to it. It gets +1 power, and it can't be blocked. And then you can bounce the Cryptic Coat back to your hand for 2 mana. So this is kind of a reoccurring win condition for the deck, as well as Chrome Host Seed Shark in here. You have Long Goodbyes as removal, Confounding Riddle as counter and kind of anticipate style effect. Siphon Insight could also be used as a win condition, as well as the Myrex in the mana base and the Shipwreck Marsh. The Restless Reef. Counters, more removal, Shieldred, and Jace for the domain matchup. The one card that was actually pretty solid, I played a version against the version of this. They brought in Alkazots in the grindier matchups, especially the non-exile based. I was playing a creature deck, and it gained them a lot of life. It just kept coming back, and it was just a reoccurring way to kind of get some value. So that's something you might want to consider. And then lastly, Rapsolo got Mythic with a Golgari Midrange. So I'd say even aggro, so elements of the Golgari aggro midrange deck, but a bunch of removal, Tenacious Underdogs, Mosswood Dread Knight, as well as a Sharp-Eyed Rookie. You have Glissas in here, Sentinels, Preachers, Archfiend. You have the new Massacre Girl in here, as well as some Shieldreds. 6 creature lands in here to kind of boot. Hand Hate, Sweepers for like the Go Wide, Liliana for the Grandier matchup, as well as in like Gix Command, stuff like that. So I'll get a deck list of this one up included as well, because there wasn't one here that I can easily copy. So we'll kind of go from there. But let me know what you think if you've been playing anything new. Like I said, a lot of the old decks are still reasonable, so you can kind of go from there. And we'll take it from that. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one, and stay safe out there.